Okay, that's all good now.
Brilliant, thank you. Welcome members, welcome officers, welcome visitors to our subcommittee of the Commercialisation and Future Finance subcommittee of Policy and Resources. We have 9 items on our agenda tonight that we need to get through. This is a remote meeting, so I should just point out we are not in control of the YouTube comment section. So if there are any comments on YouTube as we go along, sadly they're not being monitored at this moment in time by the council. We're not able to remove them at this stage, so just need to put that on record. And also, in order to record members' votes, as we have done now for the last few months, I will ask each member to unmute themselves and to give a verbal recording of how they are voting on each item so that it can be lawfully recorded. Lots to get through tonight, and so I'm going to look to crack on. We have no apologies. Agenda item 1, we are a full house of members. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations from members? Agenda item 4 then is a commercial review update from people 2, and we have a presentation. Mr. Butler is on hand. Councillor Harrison.
Are you going to deal with item 2, the minutes?
A very good point. I should do that, really, shouldn't I? Deal with the minutes of the previous meeting that was held a couple of weeks, or 19th of May now, going back to the 19th of May. Are there any matters arising from members of the minutes? Councillor Rimmer.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It was just a query on the minutes, because in respect of your election of chairman, it talks about the remainder of the municipal year 2020 to 2021. And so I think that might be a slight typo, and it might actually be meant to be until the AGM.
Yeah, okay. We can
that's correct. I can get that amended.
Yeah. Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, just on the voting pattern at the end of it, which isn't on the published minutes at the moment, there it indicates that Councillor Callaghan used his casting vote for the election of a chairman. He didn't. I used the casting vote because I was in the chair at that point in time.
Lots of oversight of the election of chairman. There you go. Democracy in action.
Do you think that means we need a recount?
You can be so like, feel free, Craig. If you want to win elections, I'll teach you how to do it. Let's go to the vote on the minutes subject to the amendments as outlined from Councillor Rimmer and Harrison. Councillor Harrison, how do you vote?
In favour.
Councillor Baggott?
In favour.
Councillor Rimmer?
In favour.
And I vote in favour. Thank you. The minutes are carried unanimously. Okay, let's go back to agenda item 4, which is a commercial review update. It says we're to receive a presentation as well. Annie, do you have the ability to share screens?
Yeah, I think, Chair, I'll try and do it from mine and see if that works, Chair. Okay. Can everybody see that, or is it coming through?
Yes, that's come through. Thank you, Mike.
Because I lose sight of everybody, so if you can help me and guide me through. So, Chair, is that all right if I commence?
Yeah, that's fine.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to present to the subcommittee. Just firstly as background, we were appointed following a tender to undertake a review of the commercial strategy in terms of the effectiveness of the strategy since its commencement, launch in 2018, what lessons could be learned and what was working well. And then there was a sort of second stage about what the future opportunities might look like. From a People 2 perspective, we just, a minute background, we work with about 30 councils across a whole range of services, as well as commercialisation, commercial procurement and digitalisation. And personally, given the subject's commercialisation, probably bringing my own experience of running probably 9 different businesses that have operated in the private into public sector market, and have also been involved in public commercial enterprises. and I'm also a trustee of a leisure trust, commercial leisure trust. So that's sort of background from and where we came to. In terms of, sorry, see that. So we'll take a sort of 3 steps. That first one being the review of the current strategy and how that's been implemented. I'll then turn to what regard as the future opportunities for the council, both in terms of immediate and more strategic, and then just wrap up with the summary recommendations and obviously questions. In terms of the first step was the commercial strategy and how's the council doing so far. I think the key thing is that, you know, we were asked lots of questions about, well, how other councils doing. I think the answer is most councils have not really progressed commercial extensively. There tends to be pockets of commercialization for an individual service, but not what we would describe, and as we'll come into, whole-scale commercialization. So it's not that Basildon as a council is well behind. I think more what we want to point out is there is a substantial opportunity. So I think the strategy provides a framework for the organization to operate in. It was launched, there was lots of support offered, strong member commitment to commercialization, and a readiness to use commercialization to support corporate priorities, and obviously deliver financial benefits was the core original focus. I think now, as we'll come on to, I think there's an opportunity, particularly given COVID, to use commercialization to also focus on social outcomes as well as the financial benefits. I think where the council has been very positively has focused on strategic opportunities more than at a service level. So you'll be well familiar as a committee around Sempre Homes, the commercial assets, which obviously pre-COVID was a strong focus. And then thirdly, the town centre regeneration. So most of your, what I would say, new commercial activity has focused at that strategic level to drive return for the organisation. There has been sort of ongoing service level trading, and also you have progressed Revs and Bens, the shared services with Brentwood, which gives you a return. So there's been some new activity and some return. However, in terms of looking at that, you know, we believe there's a substantial opportunity where you could really deliver greater financial and social outcomes. I think, yeah, in working closely with the officers, and that's SLT, and we think met all the heads of services, I think there's a recognition that, you know, there's certainly more could be achieved, recognizing some of the good things that have been done to date. But I think, you know, the key message was commercialization is not clearly defined and understood across the organization, particularly at services. Because commercialization for many is sort of selling, it's trading. And I think the recognition is that, yeah, a lot of people join not to be salesmen and doing business development. And I think so some of this is also about understanding individuals. Or why would you do it if you were a service manager? Because if they're balancing their budget, delivering a good service, I think the question is then, well, why would we want to? Why do we need to do more? And why do it? Because we could spend a lot of effort trying to trade with our neighbours or local residents, but actually that could be a minimal return. So I think, you know, in terms of one of the less key areas is to get that view of commercialization down at services and get service managers to understand how they can really contribute. And what I've put in here is that's not just about trading, it's also, and we'll come on to this again, operating more commercially. So in any commercial organization, it's partly about, yes, how you trade, but more importantly, is actually how you operate. And if you operate efficiently and effectively, that gives you the basis to actually trade. The second point was around culture and accountability. So I think at a corporate level, there's a greater culture around being commercial, and particularly around the strategic aims, and that's strong. And as I said, you know, so the leadership level, we see a strong environment for commercialization. But in terms of, there's a lack of who's really accountable for commercialization. What we see is individuals have part accountability for their elements of it, but actually as an overall program, and particularly down at services, I think there needs to be greater accountability. And part of that is setting targets, part of that is supporting managers to do it. I think the other point, and we discussed this with officers and about this, is I think also recognizing that your service managers and managers will have different strengths. So some will be great operationally. You will know them as the head of, and they do a fantastic job. But they may not be the people who have a commercial mindset and are going to go out and trade. And I think what's really important, and this is equally in the private sector, by the way, not just in the public sector, recognizing where you have people who are really good operationally, but may not be business minded or commercially minded, but others who are really strong at that and who have a natural ability. And I think one of the things we've raised, and I'm sure it'll come out around some of the skills, is recognizing that you will have inherited managers with a range of different expertise. And if somebody's strong operationally, but will never be good in a commercial business development sense, you don't put them in that position, because part of that is about confidence and having those right skills. So I think recognizing that you can't pigeonhole every manager to be commercial. I think also, is having a clear structure to whatever, as a subcommittee, you decide to progress the commercial program, both at a corporate and service level. Because I think people see the big strategic opportunities, but at services, I think there needs to be far more structure and a program which drives through that commercial activity. And I think in terms of new ideas and innovation, I know we discussed with officers that, actually part of this is there's not sufficient new ideas and innovation coming through, rather that focus on the strategic and what I would call business as usual, whether that's trade waste, etc. So I think there needs to be that clear structure and a program. I think the other critical thing is ambition and scale, because councils do talk about being commercial and outside of Basildon, but then actually don't really have a clear ambition and the scale of that. So there's a lot of publicity about, let's say, pure commercial assets, but being commercial, if we take it in a wider sense, there needs to be an agreed ambition and scale. And therefore, as in any commercial organization, you look at what capacity and what skills and capability do you need to support that? What business development support do they need, marketing, financial management, etc., to support people to grow commercial activity. So I think there's some real positives, but I think also some real opportunities, but lessons, I suppose, that I'll come on to if you really, as an organization, want to grow that. So I think in terms of the next stage was looking at opportunities, and I think we've categorized this into 3 areas. The immediate of actually part of being commercial is operational efficiency. And actually that is being commercial, is how you operate. So much in the private sector, that's a core part of being commercial, is getting your costs right before you're really thinking about actually can we be fit for purpose and trade in a market. And I think for some services, this will be the first stage of commercialization, which they will operate at, because there won't be trading opportunities. So it's a focus. I think for us, the key, whilst we didn't focus on efficiency, it was more about commercial income growth. We think there is opportunities for greater efficiency. One example being that investment in digital, and we know digitalization is a key strategic theme for the council, and part of that will clearly enable services to be more efficient. I think the second thing is, and this is not uncommon in many councils, is getting to a real detailed understanding of your service costs, productivity, the activity, the performance that you're striving to achieve for whatever your cost is. Now that sounds sort of obvious, but you operate a very wide range of services in the council. And like most councils, focused on a sort of revenue budget line versus probably the detail that we think, you really need to understand that, both from an efficiency perspective, but as we also said, looking at your fees and charges, what you would charge if you were trading, could you be competitive, and at what level could you be competitive, and how does that match? Because sometimes you can trade. One is just to actually get some economy of scale on your operating costs, and we've seen that often in things like grounds maintenance, where councils have traded really to get a better utilization of resource, or you trade generally for income and contribution purposes. I think for some fees and charges, you do look at it in detail. We think that should be something that just rolls out of a detailed understanding of costs and activity. And that applies to probably most of the services that you operate. So I think our first level is very much about the operational efficiency, and that's in your control and immediate, and something immediate. I think, just as an example, and I know you have a wider organizational strategy, which the officers are progressing. I think just as an example, what do I mean in tangible terms? What does an operational efficiency framework look like? It clearly has 3 things. One is, effectively your commercial model has number 2, which is actually your operational delivery. 3, the bit we have is your commercialization. So should you be looking at shared services, trading, and then 4th is smart technology, digital. So your services should be going through this sort of rigorous process. Whilst there's wider things in the organizational strategy, for the purposes of commercialization, there's 3 key areas, and it can be any model, but this is just as an example around their operations being commercial in terms of trading, shared, or technology. And then from that, getting clear, measurable targets that helps to manage expectations and underpinning that with really robust financial service implementation plan. So that, there's different models, but that's the core essence of what I would call the sort of level 1 operational efficiency. I think in terms of the second area is what we call strategic themes, and I won't go through this in all in detail. And this was really saying, well, if you were really going to look at strategically where might there be bigger, larger returns over a period of time, where would the council be looking to? Now, the world has changed. COVID is here, and I think that presents some risks, but also presents some opportunities. I think you've got your clearly, substantial town centre regeneration strategy and master plan. You've got, and I think, the private sector market's changed as well. So traditional, what we would call revs and bends outsourcing, that market has changed. I ran one of the business process outsources about 13 years ago. That market's changed, and therefore the private into public market has struggled for reasons of, a host of reasons. But I think what that does present is an opportunity in certain areas, as you've started to show in revs and bends, an opportunity for public to public offerings, and maybe in a different way. And then fourthly, probably another factor is, as an organization and members, you have agreed a substantial digital investment. And that gives you both an efficiency opportunity, but also a trading opportunity. So there's certain factors that I think, in addition to the traditional commercial activity that we see, creates key strategic themes for you. So just very rapidly, the first 2, asset expansion, shared services, is something that you're already doing. So in asset expansion, as you'll see, you've got Sempra, you've got the town centre regen, and obviously you've got your own asset base. And what we think is some of that you'll rationalize, but also you will look at areas where you can invest and grow for a return. So you've got a really good base to start. And what we're suggesting is actually putting them all together in an integrated sense of assets that you can get a greater return. Some of that will be rationalization, so efficiency, and others will be investment. But obviously, you have a strong program that's already well on track with that. The question for us is, how could you really accelerate that and get a greater return? The second area that you've started on is around the revs and bends, shared services trading. So what we mean is you could do a shared service with the council, and you often councils don't actually save much. It's a lot of effort to save the odd management post. I think when you start to use that as a trading channel, as you're doing in revs and bends, you can get larger returns. And we do think in the area there are services, so revs and bends is where you started, some more the back office services, where I think there really are opportunities. And using digital enables you to automate more, be more efficient, more competitive. So we think those are opportunities to expand. I think in terms of some of the other areas, digital was one which I touched on. Part of what we do, we've focused a lot on digital and been involved in digital businesses. You've got that substantial investment program, and we think there is a substantial opportunity for efficiency, but also commercially. As you develop cloud-based service software, mobile apps, intelligent data analytics, you'll be doing digital design, all those key factors of digital. We think that's an opportunity to commercialize that and get a revenue return from that. And that's a trend that we're starting to see in the market, because you're already investing. So whether you develop that yourselves or you develop that with partners, and some of those partners, I see this week that you've got a centre around digital incubation. We think that's a great way to encourage local businesses and opportunities. But it's a very fragmented market in digital. And I think there's an opportunity for the council to develop something for its own purposes, but actually get a secondary return around commercializing that. Commercial procurement, I think, is an opportunity, and that's really looking at all your third-party spend and your outsourced contracts and going, well, could we derive greater value from that? So could we still work with the existing partner, but actually commercially look at the contract and drive greater value. That might be in your leisure contract or your FM contract. We know agency staff, you have a substantial spend. We're starting to see models where councils are now creating their own platform for agency, which gives them greater control and enables them to target employment locally. So there's a social outcome for that. But I think, or you might look at services and actually think they might be better, whether that be in-house, but all important, might be in a leisure trust. But you've obviously got existing contractual terms. But we think most councils are really focused on this, particularly with COVID and the procurement policy notes. There's opportunities to actually revisit some of those opportunities, whether you continue or change delivery models to drive greater value. The other two opportunities on the left is really what we call year two. So we would suggest you focused on doing some research into these areas, because we see them, they are going to be substantial commercial opportunities. So the green economy, I think most people will be very familiar with. We think, and we gave some examples, renewable energy, district heating, electrical charging. There's a whole lot around energy management systems. We think there's some real opportunities, and obviously town centre regeneration will also enable this, to look at where you could create commercial return. Now it's a big topic, big area, and what we suggest in this immediate year is to do more research, really look in depth, and from a Basildon Council perspective, what does that mean for you, and actually where would those be investment opportunities? But very much part of the recovery post-COVID nationally and for the economy, green economy is certainly something, and climate change, that's going to be critical. So worth really researching. Social care, we work a lot in social care, so we don't mean you become a social care provider. I think there's a real opportunity to contribute to what is going to be a really difficult market pre-COVID, post-COVID, as we're working with councils and adults and children's services. It's going to be very tough. Your district, you are locally placed, you have services like housing, you have leisure, and there's opportunity to expand that to support the social care market in terms of community-based services, which is the key direction that they are going. So I don't mean you'll become a domiciliary care provider, but we have seen some examples nationally, and we think that's an opportunity. Certainly in terms of digital, we're involved in digital in social care, and that is a substantial opportunity. It's a very generally labor-intensive service. There is innovations in digital and social care that we think that's a clear opportunity. And thirdly, asset investment. So we're seeing an opportunity where councils are looking at building their own assets, as opposed to the private sector market. So splitting out facilities versus operating. Sheltered housing is an example. How can you use your housing assets in a different way that could provide, if you like, a different asset facility base for the provision of social care, because children and adults will change substantially. We're already doing pre-COVID and will do. So that's a sort of look through the strategic side. The third level, in addition to the efficiency and strategic, is what I would call business as usual. So that's some of the things that you are already doing, which is you are trading existing services. So I think, not to repeat stage one, but I think at a service level, I think there's a real opportunity to look at services and go, well, actually, what would happen if you really accelerated trade waste? The question is, could you be competitive? And if so, could you really expand that? But I think, there is an inconsistency across, and if services don't really believe, well, why should I do it? Then actually you don't get that, that engagement. And I think there are, again, it's not all councils. There are some councils who have been successful in individual service areas, delivered returns, but I think there is an opportunity to expand what you've got. I think in terms of fees and charges, whilst you do it for some of your services, part of what we discussed around the efficiency framework and understanding costs is actually really trying to revisit those and work out which ones are you consciously subsidizing, which ones are you consciously breaking even or making a contribution. But I think when you do some of that initial work we described around efficiency, you then start to look at your fees and charges and understand where does that sit with your cost base, and you'll make conscious decisions about what you may want to do with those elements. And I think in terms of some of the areas that we were fed, that services came to us about, we know there was a crematorium, the creme business case, which had got to a certain stage, and generally our experience is, I think the business case has got potential. We've seen a number of councils do very well, and clearly that needs to be taken through to a conclusion and a decision made. I think environmental health, you do a level of income, but we've seen that as a key opportunity for councils to expand. And I suspect something with COVID that may well increase, but being proactive and positive with businesses and move into some of the advisory space and expand, I think the service itself recognises there's really opportunities. I think in terms of leisure, we know it's an outsourced arrangement, but coming back to my community-based services, I think there are opportunities to work, even if you remain, with the current operator, to expand. Certainly in my leisure trust, we have grown substantially community-based services because we've got assets and we've got people with skills in the community. And I actually chair the strategy subgroup for the leisure trust, and we've seen quite a significant growth in that activity. Trade waste, you currently do, and I think that opportunity is, could you expand? Do you really make a contribution? But understanding the operating model. The private sector has a particular operating model which is different to most councils, and I think part of this, if you're going to be competitive, is understanding what your operating model is going to be and whether you can expand in that. So small areas around pest control, which sounds quite small. We work with councils where they make crudely 30,000 contribution per pest control officer. Again, a competitive market, but from our perspective, we think it's one that you can actually trade on your public sector brand, because the market, let's say, is indifferent in what it offers to compete. Training was one that the officers had already identified as an opportunity. And then I think below, we just put a range of areas that really have been talked about, that have been kicked around. And I think there needs to be some focus and assessment. So do you just drive efficiency? Is there a shared service opportunity? Or is there some trading? But I think they are ones that have been sort of in the pot for a while. And I think you need to get some focus on whether you want to continue. So in summary, really, so what is that from a perspective? Where do you think? I think the first critical thing is agreeing the extent of commercialization. So how wide? Is that really across the gambit, the 3 areas I mentioned? And what's the future ambition? Because that really, from your members' perspective, gives direction to the officers, and then from officers down, through to your service managers. I think, having learned hard lessons on commercialization, both in the public and private, if you're going to do it, it has to be a core activity. If you really want this to make a difference, both to, you got your MTFS budget round approaching the next year, but also in terms of social outcomes, given the impact of COVID, we think there's real returns, but it's not something that people will just do in their spare time or an extra hour. I think at the moment, you've got some capacity and skills, but you've got a lot of people with a day job trying to do some commercial in addition. And, really, by building some robustness around what you could achieve, that starts to create the business case to invest if you want to scale up. And as I said, using that public sector brand. I think in the private sector, we'd often love to have the public sector brand as part of what we could trade, and don't estimate how strong that public sector brand is. So I think that's a clear direction that's needed to the officers about actually how far do we really want to go with this. And you might say, well, at one level, efficiency is a given. Some of those strategic things we're doing, how far do we want to go with that, and on what basis? I think the second area of recommendation is around governance and decision making. Obviously, you have yourselves in the subcommittee, and then SLT, and I understand officers looking at a commercial group. I think, in all commercial organizations, you need to have that appropriate level of delegation and autonomy to drive that commercialization, whether that's at this subcommittee and officers. Because I think otherwise, the decision making, the investment, all becomes really difficult. So I think it's having a shared understanding of what's our ambition, what does that look like in terms of commercial portfolio, commercial program, where are we going to focus on, and actually then that gets driven forward both at a member level, but also at officers. And I think at the moment it's not, that shape isn't there. So there's some things that are really good, but I think that needs to be proportionate to your ambition. If you don't want to do commercial, then that's a different set of governance. But I think there really needs to be that clarity around that decision making and ability, I think, to be flexible and to take commercialization forward and have that clear view. I think I put in strategic advisors, and that some of these areas will be new to you. So if you look at the green economy as an example, or digitalization, for some of those, commercial group SLT may say, well, actually, who does it really well? Is it at a council? Who's the market expert in the green economy? And I think sometimes councils are reluctant to sort of perhaps look at that expertise and their strategic advisors. But, I think certainly anything I've done in businesses, there's plenty of people who know far more than I do. Actually, there'll be times when you may want to access some of that, because actually, even at the research stage, let alone the delivery stage, there's ability to scale up opportunities. I think, and certainly talking to the officers, I think whatever comes out of this is getting that, developing a real overarching commercial program, robust program and implementation plan, and that can be a catalyst for really accelerating growth, because from that ambition into the program, send some really clear messages throughout the organization, across services, so everybody understands what their role is in commercialization and how they can contribute and how they're going to be supported. I think if you're going to be successful, you need real measures and agreed targets. So, whether that be in my world, financial and social, you always have to have a rigor around those targets. Imposing targets and is one thing, but I think what you want to do is be challenging. But actually, people need to understand that if we're going to go into trade waste, we do a business case, or if we get strategically into digital, what are we really going to achieve? Now, you're not going to achieve them all, but what you have is a view, and this is, I think, an understanding around you can have a level of risk and return, but actually what you do have is a set of targets and plans that you have confidence in that can deliver. But I think also that every officer and everybody's focused on what they're trying to achieve and the measurable value targets that can be done. I added a comment on 4, which was about the value of spin out. I think you also got to think at some point in areas like digital, we have seen it in some other areas where you might create something that trades, but actually you might decide at some point to either spin it out as its own entity, or you could sell off it. And I think in certain areas like digital, as probably some of you most of you well aware, some of the valuations around digital is very substantial. So often not thought about, but we have seen some of that where organizations have spun out. I think finally, part of this is around the areas I've touched on around efficiency, strategic themes, and service trading. There needs to be, further assessment. Some areas you're already on track with, but in some of the other areas, you need to make that commercial assessment, work out whether those are real opportunities and at what pace and level you could accelerate those, and then have a real visible plan. And I put micro business plan for some of the service areas, but obviously you'd have more substantial business plans at the strategic level, and then build those targets in. But I think recognizing that, the way to encourage and challenge is to give challenging targets and stretching targets, but you're not going to achieve them all. But I think there needs to be some real rigor around some of the assessment, particularly the new areas, and how you take those forward. I think second penultimately around your culture and the OD program, and I know that I've talked to Stuart Young. I think whatever you as a committee decide in SLT, you have to have is really robust a commercial culture in whatever definition and how far you decide to take commercial. Everybody needs to be feeling that is a core part of what the council does. It's part of what you do. It's part of the DNA, and actually everybody understand why there's an organization you are doing that, and then that is taken to the organization. And I think recognizing what I said is you need the capacity, expertise, proportion. So it's great to be ambitious. You want to do it all, but you don't have the level of current capacity and necessarily the level of expertise in all these areas to take all of this forward. And I think that's a critical factor. You're not going to deliver all this commercialization with no investment. And then finally, I think the corporate function can support the program. It has done, and I think if you proportion again, whether that be project support, business development and marketing, often it's quite interesting that a lot of the services you're looking to trade is often to the same customers, i.e. the residents or businesses or other councils. So when you start creating a commercial portfolio, actually starting to think about, well, if we're talking to a council about offering them rebs and bends, are we thinking about other services we may want to provide? So I think, but some of that, you're not going to have that function at each service and each commercial. Some of those things you want to have as a corporate support. And I think that needs to be underpinned with those detailed financial analytics that then support you to be able to drive efficiency. And I think second, as I said, gives you a sound base to do pricing and trading. So, Chair, I think that's the summary of the stage 1, 2 and the recommendations. I'm happy to take questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. Is it possible for us to unshare screen so that I can see everyone? Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks.
Lots of points there to cover, and lots of thought-provoking questions, I'm sure. I know, obviously, the next 2 agenda items as well, there may be crossover in terms of some of what members ask and want some clarity on, so we can dance around it. But for the time being, I'm going to open this up to questions on the presentation that we've just seen. And Councillor Harrison indicated, and Councillors Baggett and then Rimmer.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mike. I found that really interesting. A couple of questions. How far behind the game is Basildon, in your view? And secondly, it's a good presentation. Can you make sure I have a copy of it? Because some of the print was quite small on my laptop. Thank you.
I think, yes, to the second. I think in terms of the format, I think if you're measuring yourself against other councils, you're no further behind councils, because it's, as I said, I think some councils, there are some councils have done aspects of it, commercialisation, but in terms of the scope that I've outlined, few councils have achieved that. What I think the answer is, could you be better than other councils and I think to make more commercialisation, absolutely yes. So I think there's more the opportunity. I don't think lots of councils are doing this and are well ahead of Basildon. That's certainly not the case. I think the financial pressures that councils have faced have started to create. I think about 3 years ago there was a focus that, look, we'll just trade our way out of a financial problem. It never really worked because it was done kind of in isolation. But I think, if I compared to where commercial organisation would operate, then Basildon has got some way to go, because you're not structured as a commercial organisation. So you don't want to lose the good public sector things that you do and the great services you provide. But if you want to be really commercial, if you benchmarked against what I would call a good commercial organisation, I think there is a gap. But that's not, I think, where the focus has been.
Can I come back, Chair? Another part of your presentation referred to the need to get this commercialisation image across all levels.
Yeah.
Now, my concern on that is you can spread something very thinly across all levels, whereas I think you might well need a 4, 5, 6 at the top who really know their business to lead those below. Now, I'm concerned of a timescale then, because you might have a great idea, you can get a great team in place, and the time you're trying to feather it all down to everybody else, opportunities are lost.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's not going to be one size fits all of it. So I think it's understanding out of the sort of a broad menu that I outlined, where's the priority. So I think for some services, they may be at base 1, which is about efficiency. You might go, actually, what we need to do is just need to be, you're running a good service. How can you be more efficient? Whereas for others, you may see bigger opportunities. And the point is to get that assessment in to then determine that effort versus the return. But I agree with you. The way you change the culture is by getting success. So I think it's not proportionally every service is going to have a trading plan. I think for some services, so if I pick trade waste, which I know is close to you, you've got waste as a service, which is your priority, is providing waste, residential waste. On the other hand, you've got trade waste. Now, I know you're driving a change program in waste. In your trade waste, I think you can quite quickly come to assessment of whether is that something you really should be in, how would you do it, and how can you compete? And then you then go from that basis to decide, actually, is that something you really want to focus on? Or actually in year 1, what I'd rather focus on is efficiency in my residential waste, because that's actually going to give me a bigger return, whereas trade waste might be hard work. Whereas I think trade waste is an opportunity. I think planning is another example where I think there's probably opportunities to drive efficiency through using digital and automation, but actually you already get planning fees. So how do you, to trade planning or to do a shared services is very difficult. So let's put the effort in year 1, let's focus the service on actually how could they be more efficient and use digital. I think it'd be a great service to be one of the the first to go through that sort of process. But so I think you can't do it all in year one. So getting that priority, and part of I think of from here is saying, yeah, actually, what is that prioritization looking like? And it is really important to get successes, because when particularly at a peer level, so people can go, if Sempre House is a great success, what does that mean for heads of services? Not a lot really, it's kind of great, but actually some of this has to be peer-to-peer success stories and learning.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Baggett.
Thank you, Chairman. Some of what I'm going to talk is sort of touching on points that Councillor Harrison raised, but just like from a different perspective. But before I do that, I just want to say thank you for the presentation, very informative and very, very useful. There are a number of things you alluded to there. Before I go into those, I think as well one is commerciality. It is a bit of a chicken and egg. Do you get yourselves positioned in the right way so that then you can take the opportunities? Because there's always going to be opportunities in the world of commerciality. Do you get yourself positioned and then take advantage, or do you rush into things when you don't have the capacity or the resource and then do it badly? And that's one of the things I think is important. You also touched on the experience and the ability of people. And I've said right from the get-go that and this is not being disrespectful to officers in any respect, but there is a difference in the thinking and how people think in local government compared to in the world of private companies. And if someone was going to be the next Richard Branson, they'd be out being the next Richard Branson. They wouldn't be sitting here at nearly 8 o'clock at night doing a subcommittee meeting on commerciality. And I've always said that really one of the things that maybe we should be considering is having somebody that is commercially minded at the core of this, even if it becomes a full-time employee, that drives commerciality across the board, that has that experience, that they can again build and develop the capacity. But that's just my own personal view. The question I do have, though, is I don't think that we're necessarily in a race against other councils on commerciality. I think it's far more important. The question is, where are we, would you say, if 100% was we're geared up, ready to go now to seize commercial opportunities, and 0 is don't even start, where did you on that scale put Basildon as the ability to start moving things forward? And if we are, and based upon that percentage, how long do you think it would take to get us to the 85-90% range? Because I suspect we're not in the 85 to 90% range yet.
Sure. So I think just welcome that. I think taking your previous point that you made, I think being commercial, you're right, is not it's not necessarily been what the public sector does. I think that's absolutely right. Although once upon a time I was in the public sector. I think what you can recognise is the strengths. There's a lot of good services. And there's a lot of good people who are strong operationally, very credible. And I think, so the first point about being commercial is, have you got something to sell? And I think there's there are opportunities, but you've also got things that, you could trade, because actually you as a council do them well. There's some things that you don't do as well. So I think it's not, I think there is the ability to be commercial, but I think, it's a different mindset and a different skills. I think what's happened in the past is that level of ambition to be commercial. So I think the strategic opportunities have been great. Officers have really progressed that. But I think if you want to take that wider, it needs a bigger mindset. In terms of your point about percentages, I think if you are really going to seize, let's say, the level of program that potentially I outlined across those 3 levels, where would I suggest you be? Is you're probably sub 50%. You're somewhere big, and that's actually where you are ahead of other councils. Is you have an absolute. I think you've got funds to invest. You have already committed investment funds, so you've got that. I think you've got, from what I've seen, strong member support, an SLT that I think would continue to take this forward and want to expand it. So you've got the basic ingredients. You've got a public sector brand. So if we were looking at this as an investor, if we answer your question, I think there's some great things here that actually we could build on, because you've got services, you've got credibility, you've got a public sector brand, you've got some investment, well, that'd be great. And you've got some really good officers who I think if you went, right, let's actually really go for it, you know, there clearly is that potential. So I think there's a lot of good things if I was looking at it as an investor looking into Basildon Commercial Limited to invest. I think that the challenge is that it's it's not that commercial becomes something that you do instead of everything else. In fact, if you want to be commercial, across all those opportunities, because you can't do them all at once, is getting a real clear view of the program, the prioritization, the effort versus the return. You know, you can get some short-term wins, but actually you want to mix some short-term, which is the things that are in your control, like efficiency and some of your traded services, to some of the strategic things, which may be sort of medium-term. And I think you have not got the capacity, and you've certainly not got the depth of expertise if you really want to take that program on, because you have officers who are doing this sort of part-time as well as everything else, and you can't run a commercial, you know, program organization, you know, doing it part-time. And I think so. If you want to be commercial, I think it's more about that investment in that and a clear culture direction, because you've got some really good stuff and some really good officers that, you know, you could work with and take good operations and work out which of that you could take and trade.
Thank you. So sorry. So just to follow up. So you said we were about 50%.
Yeah.
How long, with a, you know, with the will and the political will and everything else, do you think it would take us to get to 70, 75%?
I think you could. I think if you to make those changes and see some measurable output, if you like, I think you could do that in. I would say you could do that in 18 months. I think you'll have some immediate wins. I think if you really start to look at something sizable, you're going to start to see something really material in about 18 months. It's just, yeah, these things take time in any sort of start. I mean, as an entrepreneur, I always think it's always going to happen faster. I've done that many 3-year plans. I think that there must be now 30-year plans, I think, by the time I got there, because you're always learning and you're always evolving and the market's changing. So things like revs and bends, if you'd asked me that question probably 3 years ago, I would have said don't compete, because the private sector market were competing at a loss. You know, my previous business was bought by one of them, and they were bidding at -5% loss. Well, you couldn't compete on that on an open tender. Whereas now, that's caused the market to collapse, where actually I think there's more reality in the market and you've got a good quality service, but it's actually just getting that commercial value proposition right to expand. And you've got Brentford. So, you know, I'd love to have that opportunity partners commercially to expand on something. So I think it just takes time, you know. So my view is it's going to be hitting this hard for the next 3 to 6 months, focus, and then building up a sort of 3-year plan of commercial activity. And I think in 18 months you'll start to see a sizable difference and a positioning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rimmer.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a few points to make and a few questions. And sort of my gut reaction when I see trade waste being mentioned is just of concern, to be honest. And I think as members, we should be setting boundaries, possibly in any sort of horizon scanning that the council were to do. At the moment, my PITSI, where I live and I represent, we're dealing with a lot of waste from within the borough, from outside of the borough as well. And I don't want to see that as a direction of travel for us to become some sort of waste centre for Essex. And that would concern me greatly if we went down that route. And I know you're not suggesting that, you're looking at different opportunities. But it was just to reflect on that and say that actually, obviously you're coming up with a list, and officers would come up with a list of possible commercial opportunities, but people will be wearing different hats, I guess, and looking at it different lenses. So you'd expect that sort of discussion to take place. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think, you know, in terms of commercial trade waste, you know, we've seen a very mix. So I've seen that successfully traded, but I think it's the point about understanding what is your priorities. And I think, as I said to, you know, so my response to Councillor Harrison, you know, you might have a priority about driving efficiency in the next 12 months because you want to be, you know, you want to be more fit for purpose. Trade waste, I mean, the private sector does make a substantial return on trade waste. and it's a question. But if you want to compete, you've got to understand partly how the competitive the private sector operates, i.e. one-man crews. If you're going to compete at a level, you'll always get a level of trade waste trade because people will come to the council, back to my public sector brand. But I think, if you really want to be competitive, there's opportunities because you could mirror that operating model. There are times when some services competitively it's difficult because of the way terms and conditions work in the private sector. Sometimes that is a factor where you're talking about a low unit cost. Cleaning is one which is often difficult unless you mirror those terms and conditions. But you're right, there will be different criteria. So I can look at it as a commercial opportunity, but as a council and as members, you may have a different view of that priority and some things that you may not want to progress.
Thank you. And I think there was a point in your reports, and you can see the sort of recommendations that have been made in the council's report as well, where we're talking about agility, we're talking about different levels. I actually think that the innovation is likely to come if it's bubbling up from direct reports as well as senior managers, and actually there may be an opportunity, and where actually for people at lower levels or in terms of officers to actually go to different departments maybe for a bit of time as a sort of internal secondees to try and learn different parts of the service and connect the dots and get commercial ideas that way. Is that something that you would encourage, or have you seen work in other organizations?
Yes, I think it's my point about recognizing people have different skills and strengths. They weren't recruited, most people weren't recruited into the council because they were good commercially. They were recruited because they were good at planning or an operational service. So I think when you do, and I'm sure we come down to the culture, organization development, is recognizing those people, your champions, as we would typically see them, who the people who would do some of that challenge. But if somebody who has not got a commercial mindset going into another service and advising them to be commercial, it's picking the champions. But I think also there is some great examples of people, and I don't just mean the private sector, outside the council, who can come in and ignite some of that, because some of it's the enthusiasm, the ideas, and the art of the possible sometimes. One of the things that I've talked with officers, and this may well come out later, is having that kind of innovation part of the culture is really important, both internally and people, almost the drop-in innovation, the ideas, which can be internal, but mixed with some external as well, because that's some of the energy that you start to bring into services. So I think it's a mix, but recognizing that certain people have the right skills where you want that. But success, those that are successful who start to show progress, success always breeds success. I find in cultural change.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. From my perspective, a few sort of comments and then a couple of questions that maybe some officers might want to jump in as well. And again, mindful particularly of what we've just discussed there, that some of it might fall into the culture part of the conversation. So I don't want to tread into different areas. But I think for me, what I noticed on that presentation there in particular is the issue about insufficient understanding of direct service costs. And when it comes to setting the budget, and when it comes to being in a position to look at efficiencies, and especially in light of where we are with an impending recession and no doubt a downturn in council finances and income, it's going to be really, really important that as councillors, when we come to the autumn and then into the spring and setting the budget, that we really understand that baseline. So from my perspective, when you talked there about a framework, target and delivery plan in the different services, I would like us as a committee to be able to see them in the autumn ahead of them going to service committees. I think it's important that in the first instance, we can look at that framework and we can be satisfied as members that it's covering the bases that we would like it to cover. And then when it comes to looking at the delivery plans and the targets, and I take the point about stretch targets versus realistic targets and the need to get that right, I think we need as a committee of members to understand that. And I think thirdly, and again, we'll come on to this, I'm sure, is looking at culture. And I think I speak probably for all members on the committee when I say that one of the things that we as members tend to hear a lot is we're already doing that. And those famous words, and what it can tend to mean is we're being kicked into the long grass, or it's not a priority, or we need to change it up. And so I think as part of the culture piece, we need to think about how we are embracing and engaging with, as you say, the experts. And I think Councillor Baggott and I even spoke about this last year in the sense of a NED and people coming in to offer. And I think that was what he was alluding to in his piece there. On the green economy, I take the point about the year two as it was shown in the hexagons there. But as members and officers know, that the town centre regeneration is providing massive opportunities, and particularly around a district heating network and the ability to be able to provide energy and cheaper energy bills for local businesses, for local housing as part of that master plan. And I think I don't profess to be an expert at all in the green economy, and it would be helpful to be able to get, as part of the work programme, a report into some of the potential opportunities that the green economy can bring, and then Basildon specific in light of, and obviously it's not just Basildon, we're looking at Wickford regeneration as well, and is there opportunities in those two areas to drive through some commercial opportunities. COVID, I think, is obviously setting I hate the phrase, but a new normal, whatever that is, for all of us. And I'd be interested to know around, and again, this might come into commercial culture and skills in the organisation, so perhaps we can pick this up later, but I think it's pertinent to the presentation we've just seen, is resilience. And so lots of us know a lot of this is about negotiation and about skills and being able to negotiate with the private sector and be able to kind of strive to get the best deal, whether that's in contracts or whether that's in the hard sale of a service that we're trying to promote to somebody else. And I'd be interested to know where we are on that ability as an authority at both the SLT level, because obviously SLT and ET will be the ones predominantly selling some of that stuff and engaging in those tenders and negotiations on those kind of contracts. And I think, particularly when we think of leisure and where we're going next post-COVID on some of this stuff and the big contracts that we have, that I think is a crucial skill that we need to have. You mentioned a lot in that presentation, social outcomes and social value. That is really, really important. I think it appears, doesn't it, on the hour, every hour, that we seem to be getting coming through onto our phones notifications of different businesses that are going under and making people redundant. And just yesterday we saw the potential news with EasyJet and what that could do to Southend Airport, what that could do to some of the other jobs and businesses that we have in the borough. So that is going to be really, really crucial for us going forward. And then in terms of the trading opportunities, and I think this was what Councillor Harrison was alluding to, really, how much time, I mean, I think, again, and other members can correct me, we have, it feels like, been talking about crematoriums, pest control training for quite some considerable time. We must have a kind of a business plan or a forecast of resource versus return on those different issues. And I think it's getting to a point where we've kind of got to sit here and say, it's a finite amount of resource that we have, what is actually worth pursuing, or is it, in light of the Basildon context with the regen and everything else that's going on, that we focus on the year two stuff. So that timeline and chronology of what we focus on, this committee really needs to see that and understand that and map that out, I think. And so I think we need to get that out there. So not really so much questions, because I think members covered a lot of the questions there from my perspective, but I don't know, obviously I want to be fair to officers, so I don't know if Scott or Owen, Kieran want to come in on anything that you've seen in the presentation or that members have asked and sort of pick up from there. Scott, you indicating?
Yes, Chairman. What we were hoping to do, because I'm pleased to say we're not surprised with some of the questions members have got, and I think it's important. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to Mike Butler and people too for working very closely with officers, really being quite challenging, but in the same time supportive about ideas and how we can take it forward. So wanted to, and working with Mike, I felt it was important, and we've said this about it's got to come from the top. So I felt it was very important for myself to give you a bit of a presentation about how we have worked with Mike in the last few weeks, and then as part of this committee, how you, before we get into the commercial culture, which I think was a really important point, and learning, as Mike said, we are where we are, and it's how we can, we were very honest and said, we want to move to the next level. How can you help us move to the next level, accepting, whether we're at 50%, as Councillor Baggott said, how do we get to 75? And Mike, how can you help us to get that level in the areas over a period of time? So I think what I wanted to do really, with your indulgence, if it'd be a bit of a double act, is first of all, bit of a response from officers around Mike's report, how we propose to help take it forward, and then a bit intro to the commercial culture report that Stuart will take him through more detail. So I don't know if you're happy with that. We'll be able to respond and ask questions.
Yeah, I mean, just touching on Mike's presentation, because Mike doesn't need, I know everyone wants to stay and watch our proceedings, but if he doesn't need to, he might not want to be part of the next 3 hours of presentation. So does anybody else have anything to come back on with Mike, or is it a case of thanking Mike for that presentation and what he's done this evening? Owen, are you indicating? No, okay. Sorry, Councillor Rimmer.
Sorry, it was a clarification in terms of, for Mike as well, as he actually inputted into some of the other reports that have come out in terms of the digital commercialisation. And because obviously you touched on it in your presentation, and in the digital commercialisation report, there's talk of clienteling and this idea of using the sort of behavioural science and data and actually coming up with services out of that. And when government has done this at a central government level, they've been mindful of that and brought in like Big Brother Watch to make sure that there's actually no privacy issues around that by government. And I was just wondering if that was something you were proposing, and if that was something you were proposing, what sort of safeguards would you actually propose to go along with that?
I think, Councillor, that is potentially a question that is for officers in agenda item 6. I think the remit of what people too and Mike have been asked to do was outlined in that presentation. So I don't want to put anybody in a position to have to answer questions, but it might be that following the debate and following the questions that you put, we need to get a further look into that and perhaps bring Mike back to our committee on the 30th of July or in the autumn. But it's a fair point, and I think we, in the first instance, need to give Joe, when we get to it, an opportunity to present the digital agenda as where we're up to at the moment from the council. Mike, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, just I think, Chair, can I just close off then with a final summary? I mean, I think probably just to re-echo, I think one or two points you made. I think it's been great working with Scott Owen and the team. I think there's a lot of positive things that can be built on, but I think if you want to manage expectations, I think whatever you may decide for the rest of the committee, I think he's been clear on that ambition and scale and the acceleration and pace that you want as a subcommittee. And then supporting that to grow, because I think otherwise you'll always have an expectation, but actually, there's never going to be that culture and delivery ability to achieve it. So I think it has to manage expectations. I think is equipping the officers, and then it's as we said, but have to officers to deliver. But there's some really, I think, a good basis for a commercial opportunity there. But I think it just needs that clarity, I think, from top down to deliver that. And I think there is a really good opportunity, but then I would think that, wouldn't I? But thank you very much, and thanks to Scott and the team. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for giving up your time this evening to come along and be here. Scott, on that note, I am going to move on to agenda item 5, which is commercial culture and skills. We have a brief presentation before opening it up, I believe, to Mr. Young.
Yep. So after Owen, so it's a bit of a tag team here. So I'm going to take you through a really bit about learning, partly learning from the report you just had, as well as linking into the culture and skills report. So I wanted to give members confidence that obviously how we are responding both to the report and things that how do we drive this commercial culture in more depth for the organisation. So I think we welcome what Mike said, and if you put that in the context of this short presentation, and then as I say, I'll ask Stuart to take you for the actual report or any questions from any members, specifically either of me, Owen or Stuart, who've been involved quite heavily working with Mike over the last few weeks. So if you could go to the first slide, Owen, I think you're in control of this, not me. So I think the first one, obviously, I'll leave you to read it. I won't read it all out literally. But again, what are we trying to achieve? Well, I think the people to review the council's commercial activity identified that whilst there's clear ambition from the organisation, particularly from a political perspective, and that's been over the last few years, and there's a very good understanding, as he said, at corporate level, about some of the big ticket items that we've been doing, there really remains not a really embedded appreciation of the benefits of commercial across the whole organisation, particularly the further down you go in the organisation. As he rightly said, they don't really understand, they're not coming, have not been employed to be commercial. So what we need to do is actually then make it part of the everyday conversations as part of the teams and part of the DNA of why they come to work, which is something we wouldn't have said probably 4 or 5 years ago. So how do we change that culture? So let's really what we then the first part of the job then is really what do we know, what do we understand by being commercial, which is fairly obvious, you would say. So again, on the next slide, Owen, what Mike said earlier, he had a sort of what we would call a target operating model, but we think commercial is a key part of our organisational strategy. And I've been talking for some time to members about, okay, how does the organisation respond to both the corporate plan, the ambitions of the administration's beliefs, and then how do we actually deliver that now, in particular with commercialisation being at the heart of what we do. So what we are currently developing, and we'll be coming back to I think a committee, I'll ask Stuart probably which committee it may be, P&R it comes back to, but we're working on a overarching strategy, a program of activity, and you can see some of the things we're trying to do there. And some of these are quite obvious, but actually how do we get it into a managed program rather than, as Mike said there, a bit ad hoc in terms of how the organisation does it. And clearly that will be led from the top, from ET and myself. So it is about being aware of operating costs, opportunity to generate income, within obviously checking the risks, as Councillor Emma said there, making sure we are still a public sector body. So we do identify the risks and getting more detail behind, designing services about resident need. We've been talking about that for a while, but really this is where we have to now get a program with a whole organisation, not just that from the corporate end, design services around resident need. You all know the significant investment, and I know it's later on the report, around the IT. So how do we make that work, particularly in light of COVID, that the ways of working we've now got, how do we make that embedded both internally in the organisation, as well as deliver those outcomes for our residents? And we also need just someone down there work with our partner organisations effectively. Again, this isn't about the council doing it all ourselves. That isn't necessarily commercial in trading, but it is about how we're more efficient. There's so much duplication across partner organisations. How do we do that effectively as a body? And ideally, what we would like to do when we've got an organisational strategy agreed with members is then actually share that with our partners. So do they share that partnership plan, and how can we work together and delivering that organisational strategy? So I think, again, moving on to the next slide, please, Owen. So again, this has taken really a lot, learning again from what Mike has been saying in his presentation. I think really, in the simplest form, commercial is about being aware of the cost, the values and benefit of services, knowing who uses the services, how well we provide them. And everyone should be aware of how much things cost at an operational level. I think with the review has shown itself, you know, that we do need to work in this area, and I'll come in probably a couple of slides time about how we believe as officers we should take these proposals forward. And I think that's been fundamentally part of the problem, that people see commercial as I think someone alluded to earlier about Richard Branson, that commercial is not always about coming up with an innovative idea. It is about being efficient. And I think that was the phase one he described, about some services aren't going to be in a position straight away to be trading and selling, but actually they should always be efficient and looking at, you know, every pound counts. So what we're really saying on this slide is, you know, is that there's various things around being awareness of costs, actively benchmark and seek innovation, identify and grow commercial trading. And I think that's why we're saying there, you know, in that pyramid of these are the things we should be doing over phases. So what's the immediate step? So that's really feeding off of what Mike said. What I've done already is I've set up a commercial officer and resourcing group, which I said to you before, if we're serious about this, and I think part of the challenge is it's got to be led to the top. It's got to be part of people's DNA. So if I'm not leading that myself, how on earth can I expect the rest of the organization to think commercially? And actually, and you'll see later on how I'm also going to get the message across, both from myself and from SLT, about this is your everyday job. So again, so an office group has been set up again with the support of people too, which I say I wanted to demonstrate my leadership, and we will oversee the implementation and delivery of this commercial program, which obviously we will work up shortly with members and bring it back to this committee to say, here's the program over the next 18 months, as Mike said there. So with including timescales and financial targets, which again, exactly what Mike was saying earlier. I will ensure the commercial program and delivery against these targets includes the social outcomes. And I think I also emphasize that this program will change quite a lot. I think you'll see, and I've noticed on the work program, you've got various things that will come back to you, which was picking up as part of those 6 strategic themes that Mike spoke about, those hexagons. So we're working with Mike on the step 2 of his program around those themes. So we'll bring those themes back to you for members to say, actually, these are the areas, what's the timeline, what's the outcomes, what's the resources needed to deliver that from a commercial point of view. And you can see on that slide those 6 themes which mirror, as you said, what Mike was saying. So we are working with Mike very closely on this program to then bring back to you that in more detail. So then really on the next slide, please, just to touch on this really. So what's the structure and delivery behind it? Clearly, as Mike said, from a corporate perspective, we've got a subcommittee of members with ambitions to be more commercial. So that's a great start. And then following that agreement of the work program, as I said there, we've got, we'll link to relevant service committees, because some of those decisions around trading will, like trade waste, I dare say, will go to Councillor Harrison's committee for a decision. Once a business case has been approved, it would go there for a decision of each committee. So we would need to work through all of those hexagons and then work through the relevant committees. It will continue, as I say, the commercial plans will continue to form an integrated part of the council's financial planning. I think we need to then embed a target for commercial as part of the wider MTFS, which again, as you probably know, Owen, we're working on and bringing that back to policy and resources. I think, and again, what I see, and I'm very pleased that all members on this committee are we're quite impressed with people to their approach and some of their challenges around how we operate. So we see using people to, as you said, we haven't got all the skills. We fully accept that, you know, a lot of officers came into this from a public sector background, not so much with a commercial acumen. So we will use people too, and the organisation and other organisations on some of those hexagons to bring those skills in and challenge in and act. And in the first stage, Mike, to act as a bit of a critical strategic friend, and particularly, I think it was the Chairman, Councillor Callaghan, who said earlier around green energy. Well, clearly, again, we would look to bring outside expertise in to help us form that green energy plan as quickly as possible. Before then, we bring it back to members about what are the commercial opportunities, because those are skills that we probably don't possess in the organisation. So I think really then just on the next slide, I'm whizzing through here is just to give you some comfort on here in terms of those. These are the sort of green. The green in terms on here is around sets out some of where we currently are in our commercial activity, and some of these the greens here about the reviews are happening and where things will be brought back to members, and some of those things he identified around again climate and environmental theme. We are going to need to do some more work before we can, and bring some resource in that area to look at it. So I think this is I think what I wanted to be to you is actually this is an evolving program, and over the next various committees, you'll see various different of these projects coming forward for members for consideration as part of a business case, whether you want to take these ideas forward, and then obviously with targets and timelines, as I said earlier. So I think then probably linking more to what we're really getting out of the culture piece as I go more into this, is that how are we going to get this into the D of the organisation and actually make managers and managers at all levels, particularly at the operational level rather than the strategic level. What we are going to be carrying out is a review of all of the priority service costs, activity and productivity. And we're going to do that for the service planning process. So every service has a service plan, and we're now going to include, have you seen in committee reports, a commercial section. So every service manager will have to answer to how they are being commercial, how they are approaching commercial. And we'll do that with support from the corporate team, and bring in skills, as I said, like people to support that. And as part of that delivery group, we will obviously bring those managers to that group in that challenging way of a challenge session. So we bring some rigor to, okay, so how are you dealing with this? So this is about getting the DNA of the organisation. It'll be part of performance reviews, and we would have clear program and projects and definitions and business cases, again, that you will see at this committee, as well as then to the relevant service committees. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to whiz through the last couple. In terms of engagement, I think this is the key one for me, which again really spent some time with Mike personally on this about, okay, I was particularly concerned around what he was saying around this. How do we get this culture change, which is never quick and easy? And I think Stuart will talk you more detail about that. But we need that needs, as I said, to be led from the top. So what are we going to do to use innovation, technology, and get it on people's agenda? And if we talk about it often enough, I always, I know this myself, that the more you talk about this, the more people think this is important. How do we celebrate success? And I think that always, and it has been, and whilst I've been at Basildon, is the best way of actually saying, well, how is it for a staff of all that person has been nominated? How has that person been recognised? So we need to put those services that have been very commercial, and Revs and Bens, as we know, the fact they've been trading, we need to actually put out there, celebrate and trying to get awards. And then actually what it should do is breed success across the organisation and share the learning. And I think as a councillor, how do we then bring people to the fore from other services? And I think Councillor Rimmer said it earlier. So we now have not only the regular management conversations, which I'll lead around commercial, but we've also now got a group of 40, 50 officers that have come together across the organisation, that what I'd call them the movers and shakers, those people that actually get across, talk, have got the skills in terms of the agility in terms of wanting to do different things, and those are the people that then talk to the rest of the organisation. So getting the message across the organisation is really important, and that's a key part of the early phase of that culture, that soft approach to actually being more commercial, which in time, and as Mike said, over the next 18 months should bring more innovative ideas rather than the same ones as Councillor Callahan said earlier about that we're still talking about SEMS and CREMS. How do we bring new, more innovative ideas from services to the fore? So the last slide before what I hope members will agree are the next steps, both from Mike's report and what we're recommending to members to take forward, is that we do need some more skills. So we do need some master classes, and I think I propose that working with Mike and Stuart to look at how do we improve the training for senior managers, members, online sessions training for around commercial services, So there's a number of things there what we propose to do, and as I say, I'm sure Stuart will talk about that more in his part of the detail report shortly. But you know, we need to recruit, you know, experts in areas where we have to recognise where there are gaps and skills in areas where we want to be more commercial, and that's something we want to take forward, as I said earlier. So the next steps then, is the last part, is clearly members have already given some reviews on the report today, both from Mike earlier and what you'll see for as part of the commercial culture report shortly. But I think what we have taken, or I've taken, particularly from helpfully from Mike's report, is feedback from yourself about the report today, which I'm sure you've endorsed Mike's recommendations. We then need to look at the timelines, work with Mike in the next few days and weeks around, okay, how do we come up with a program that we can bring back to members that is one that is challenging, but have with targets, but in a balanced way where we, as he said, we look at where you start. What you can't do is just go across the whole organisation. So we're going to continue to engage with people too as advisors. And I would suggest with members' agreement that we and we've spoken to this about Mike, that we use him for areas such as digital and trading, which clearly his organisation has lots of skills we've learned that can help us as we get through the programme. But more importantly, have an overview with us and as a critical friend of that programme. So then he will identify with us where there are gaps and how we can accelerate areas of the programme, as well as support Stuart and the OD team in that training as well. So I think that's really what I wanted to say, Chairman, in terms of the response to people too. But I think we all agree, and I'm pleased members do, that yes, we are. There is room for improvement, but actually it's not all bad. There are areas that have very good commercial acumen and actually good in terms of their budget and looking at efficiencies, but certainly it's not across the whole organisation, and we recognise that we need to take it forward quickly. Hence why I'm at this committee in terms of leading this, and this will be a key programme that we need to develop at pace across this year, and then be reviewed by this committee at regular intervals.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, Stuart, if you want to come in on the report before I open up to members, or you want to come in as and when we go. What's easiest?
I'll just say a few words about the report, Chair. I think the Chief Executive covered most of the issues in the report, so I'm not going to spend a long time taking you through the paper. But if I could ask if you've got that report in front of you on your screens, or a paper copy of it, if that's your preferred medium. I just want to refer to a couple of bits on the report, if I may. Following your agenda numbering, if we jump down to page 11 on your agenda papers, I just want to pick up on the breadth and depth issue that Mike Butler was talking about and Scott referred to. Councillor Harrison raised this to begin with, in that we are a big organisation and we could spend a lot of time trying to get everybody up to a level of commercial awareness which is not necessary for their job. So the diagram on page 11 is trying to demonstrate that there is a foundation level of awareness of cost and value, of customer base, of performance, that we do think everybody should be aware of. And certainly every manager in this organisation should be able to answer the question, what am I delivering to whom, at what cost, and to what benefit? And some of the activities that follow in the actions are about doing something to address that quickly. Then as we move up the pyramid or hierarchy of skills there's ever increasing depths of specialisation and the narrowing of the breadth across the council as we focus in on where we need the specialist skills. And there were one or two examples of potential service areas for those specialist skills that were talked about tonight. So what that diagram is trying to show is that we will have a foundation level of understanding and appreciation and skill in the organisation, supplemented by specialist skills where necessary. So I hope that goes to picking up the point that Councillor Harrison and other members made earlier on about how we go about approaching this. If we just skip on, many of the paragraphs that are in the report Scott covered in his presentation, so I don't propose to go over those, Chair, because that would just be repetition. On the next page of your report, on page 12, the issue that's being picked up on page 12 is that if one wants to influence the culture of any organisation, you tend to do it by picking on visible indicators of how we work and less visible indicators. And so our approach that's recommended for Basildon in the next steps uses things like changes to policy or to performance targets or to service plans as being very visible expressions of culture, and always then being supplemented by conversations, by training, by celebrating success, and indeed actively learning from failure. On that page also, there is mention of innovation, and Mike Butler talked about innovation in some depth with us. We already have a number of mechanisms by which we try to engage staff and encourage suggestions. One of those is called BAS Lab, which is the opportunity for staff at all tiers and levels in the organisation to come forward with ideas. And I think Councillor Rimmer earlier on was talking about letting the ideas flow up through the organisation. And it's our proposal in this report to make greater use of BAS Lab and other such ways of engaging people to start to surface some of the operational ideas that people may have. And, you know, they may have been sitting in their jobs for many years, frustrated about, and here is an opportunity to share those with senior officers, and probably go further than that, Chair, and say that members should be involved in that activity as well at some stage to give it some very visible leadership. The point of page 12 is to bring to members the importance of trying to sustain a cultural change. So all too often what happens in organisations is that we have whims and we have fashions. And if you work in an organisation long enough, you know that they can come and go. And Mike Butler was very keen to emphasise to us that if we're serious about commercial as a culture, we must make it the way we do business, the way we operate in the council. And so that diagram of the iceberg on page 12 is an attempt to demonstrate that we need a blended mix of different approaches. And then page 13 onwards, Chair, outlines the activities that the Chief Executive has already taken us through. And so I don't need to take you through those activities again, only to say that they are that blend of very visible changes in culture as supported by key messages and engagement. The last few pages of the report are a detailed table of development opportunities, and members will be able to see that we have segmented the audiences for that development using the columns. So members are included, and senior managers, frontline managers, and the wider workforce. And then we have included a range of different learning styles and development styles so that people will be able to read, take part, be involved in conversations, experience, and even get involved in some games around practicing some of the skills of negotiation or of analysis or of business development. So, Chair, it's probably best if I stop there and let members ask questions both on Scott's presentation and on the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Opening this up to members. Councillor Harrison's indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me say this first of all. I welcome the report. I welcome Scott's presentation. But in my view, a lot of that we should be doing already. I think we're behind the game. Stuart made an interesting comment just now. Fashions come and go. Administrations come and go. I think, and I'll say this publicly, some officers rely upon that, administrations coming and going. So today's policy won't be tomorrow's policy, perhaps. That is why tonight, unless the four councillors here tonight have some agreement on this as a way forward, there's not a lot of point, to be honest, because if the administration changes and other people have other ideas, it will stop. I look at the suggestions made, and my view is the last year, since May when I came back on the council, we've slowed down. Things are being pushed away. And to me, this report, once again, will push some things into the long grass. What this council needs to be commercial is people at the top, if necessary, someone from outside who can run the commercial activities of this council, because it needs leadership. You don't need everybody on this council meeting, as been said, in groups of 50 to come up with ideas. Let's have someone in who's got the ideas first of all, so we can kick into the long grass the ideas which are a waste of time, pick on the ones that will work and work on them and bring them to fruition. Because if we don't, I won't see it in my lifetime here, because there's delay, delay and delay. I look at things that we've tried to do as administration, and COVID is okay, it's an excuse, but things do get delayed because people think, oh, come next May, they might not be here. And I think it should be said. Officers will disagree. They say they're working perfectly, but I know of some things which are delayed, and I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong. We've got a good opportunity here to be commercial, to pick on the right ideas in terms of, yes, the Basildon Town Centre, in terms of other areas, the green economy, but there are ideas out there already across this country which can be utilised. We haven't got to go down to every Tom, Dick and Harry on the council to come up with an idea. Skills are there. Let's utilise the skills at the top because they're needed, and it's there we should start. Sorry if I'm being controversial, but I think it needs to be said.
As is your right, Councillor. Councillor Rimmer.
Thank you, Chair. I think I disagree with some of what Councillor Harrison says, but not all of it. I understand what you're saying about the cycles of actually sort of phases. Members of staff can say, oh, this is just a phase, this is just the idea of the moment, and then there'll be some other philosophy that comes along. And that's quite understandable. And I think that goes beyond the sort of political aspects of it. I think this is an organizational problem, private sector, public sector, it happens. In terms of this, I think we can agree on a philosophy, but we're not always going to agree as parties on each of the individual projects that may be identified. And in terms of democracy, you've got to accept that if people vote you out because they don't like your commercial idea, but that commercial idea might be canned. So that's just the way it goes. And we're glad of that, all of us, I'm sure. But I welcome the report of the officers, and I welcome the previous report. I think this is a step in the right direction. I like the fact that there is the element of seeing the sort of going up the pyramid in terms of the level of specialization, in terms of the level of the jobs involved. I like the fact that actually you're encouraging innovation from all levels with the BAS Lab, and also thinking about members getting involved with that. Again, I disagree with Councillor Harrison. I think the idea of having these sort of 50 champions is great. I think you need the plurality of the ideas, and actually from across the organisations, and I think that will actually encourage a different culture. It's important also to have this sort of twin track approach of having the NED idea that I think all of us are agreeing on, but having those 50 champions, I think really works. I quite like that as a concept, to be absolutely honest. And going back to this idea of cultures, I think it's how commercial we are. I think we need to be commercial, but it's not losing sight of those social outcomes and what we're trying to achieve as a council as well. And I think maybe sometimes it's flipping it and just actually sometimes saying we really want to achieve this social outcome. We can't fund it, but we haven't got the budget for it. But maybe if we were actually to look at it commercially, we'd be able to achieve this social outcome and actually underpin it with some commercials. I don't know. Let's say we decided we wanted to have out of service nuisance calls center or something like that, and we found by actually commercially outsourcing that as well, we were able to both afford it and actually make some money from it, as an example. I just think it's having that mindset as well, and I'm just seeing is Scott and Stuart on the same page with that in terms of commercialisation.
Was that question? Owen, in response to Councillor Rimmer?
I don't know.
I was going to respond to both at the end. I was waiting for any other questions. If you want me to come back on both points and ask then the team to come in.
Yeah, I just a few points to wrap up at the end, Chair, so I can perhaps do that when you're ready.
Okay, we need to deal with Councillor Rimmer's points that he's raised. Does anybody want to come back in on that?
So I can come back on these last point. Yes, we're on the same page. I probably was going to, if I can, Chairman, I'll come to Councillor Harrison's points first and then to Councillor Rimmer's. In terms of Councillor Harrison's points, first of all, I think by all means, I fully accept you should be challenging and controversial. That's your entitlement to be so. And I agree we are not perfect as officers. One of the reasons why we welcome the report, Councillor Harrison, is because we recognise that not all officers are as commercial as they should be. And we recognise some of the ideas that have taken longer than they should have done, and they need to be driven not just from the top of either ETSLT, they need to come from the organisation. There's not enough ideas. You know, we've been talking about some of these for a while, and they've not got out of base one, even if it's been asked of by SLT or members. So I do actually agree with you. We're not perfect, and we do need to do something about it. And that's why I agree with Councillor Rimmer and probably Stuart as well, that it's really important that that's the whole part of the organisation. And that agrees with reporting people too. We all need to be more innovative and understand what commercial is, and celebrate. There are lots of good ideas that aren't always going to come from ET or SLT, because we don't have either the capacity or probably not that close to the services now to know what's best to trade. And I will, if I can be challenging back with your permission, Chairman, I don't think COVID is an excuse. I think that is a bit unfair. I think COVID is something that we are all responding to and has got in the way of being commercial, but we will clearly still put commercial at the forefront of our minds as we move forward.
Thank you, Scott. Councillor Baggott.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I agree with a lot of what Councillor Harrison said, probably different elements to what Councillor Rimmer agreed with, but that's the whole issue, because I think commercialisation actually is something that transcends politics to an extent. Now, on the issue of commercialisation, I mean, from our point of view, we kicked off saying that that this council needed to be commercial when we were in administration. So to the point of different parties might get in, we're as committed to getting the council to have a commercial viewpoint as much as the Alliance. But where I have a frustration, and the Chief Executive knows this, when we took administration, which is nigh on 2 years ago now, and said we really need to kickstart, we need to get commercial thinking. And here we are 2 years on, and we've taken probably a baby step forwards. And my frustration with the way that local government works, this is no criticism of officers, the way local government works doesn't lend itself always to being able to spin on a sixpence and set things up. And I can see that from a commercialisation standpoint, if we're not careful, we're going to get a lot of frustrated members and, for that matter, frustrated officers. Because if this was a board of directors of a company that was looking to get itself into the FTSE, you wouldn't set the company up on a committee system with local government regulations and say, let's position ourselves to now take the market by storm, because local government doesn't work like that. And we need to be a little bit cleverer, I think, with how we go about looking at some of these issues. I mean, for instance, I don't believe, I don't believe necessarily that reports going to committee on commerciality are going to be slick, quick, and help people to make decisions at the cutting edge. I think they're necessary and they should be there, but there should also be maybe some sort of member working group that links in with the officer SLT team, which, if you like, is earlier in the process that allows some of the formative thinking that eventually gets to the reports that come to this committee. Because by the time you get a report to committee, it's done. And that doesn't lend itself to a commercial approach. I also think that when we talk about commerciality and linking to social outcomes, in my view, I think we've got that. I think that view is wrong. I think it's absolutely right that we should have social outcomes. But if you link every aspect of commerciality to achieving a social outcome, at times you're going to be putting a square peg into a round hole. And I actually think what you should be doing is saying, let's be commercial. And if we actually make savings or create revenue from that, that money can be used for a social outcome, which doesn't necessarily have to be linked to the activity that you're doing in the first place. And I think that way it lends itself better to being more dynamic, more free thinking, and not get pigeonholed by people saying, oh, well, we've got to do this. We need to now get this square peg sorted. We need to invent a social outcome. And then you get wrong decisions being made because you've gone down a wrong thought process to begin with. Now, I'm also minded when we first set up inclusion and diversity within the council, and there was a debate there about how do you embed inclusion and diversity at every level. And what we did was, it was a requirement that every report had at the end an inclusion and diversity section to show that somebody somewhere had thought about it. Now, I said this again nearly 18 months ago. If we really want to embed commerciality, every report should have a commerciality section. Are there any commerciality issues with this decision? What are they? Are they positive? Are they negative? You know, almost a SWOT analysis of commerciality on every report that goes to council. Because what's then happening is the report writers, the officers, from the top right the way through to the bottom, are being encouraged to be thinking about it right from the get-go for reports that are being prepared. And that starts to accelerate the culture and the thinking to put us in that position. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Baggott. I'm in danger here of having a clean sweep of members agreeing with one another. And I think from where I would come for on that is the commercial agenda. I mean, I've been very clear. I never came into local government to get into this whole buying property and real estate in Coventry or wherever it is. I'm not sure that is a particularly smart way of financing statutory services at local government level, if I'm being brutally honest. But we have to play with the hand that we've been dealt by central government in the respect of local government finance. So throughout the course of the last 3-4 years, there has been cross-party support and consensus for the need to commercialise. I think we might disagree on the fact that too often the need to commercialise is just so that the council can stand still rather than provide headroom for the council to be able to go forward and do new things or add capacity to deliver new things, because we are living in a world of deficits and structural deficits and, you know, future uncertainties over how much we're getting in. So I think that's been the only issue. But, you know, certainly from my point of view, I believe that members of this council have taken some very important, very bold and very strategic decisions over the last 4 or 5 years, going back to the creation of a wholly owned house building company, all the way through to, you know, hundreds of millions of pounds of committed money for commercial and strategic assets, a willingness and an ability, and we will see later on tonight, won't we, a third strand of possible commercial monies and avenues for the council to explore. We have been very open-minded as a council. There are lots of other councils up and down the country where officers would not get a hearing coming to members with some of those proposals. So in that sense, I think that members have been. I think, you know, there is an issue about pace, and there is an issue about resistance, and there is an issue about we're doing all of this already. We don't need to look at it, and we don't need to understand it. And I think the key thing for me is, if we look at the program there, which had the crematorium, the pests, the parks, and all the rest of it, we need to understand, and we should have this at our fingertips, how much money that can raise if we put that level of resource into it. Because if it is pointless, if it's peanuts, we shouldn't bother doing it. And members, you know, I don't think we are being unfair or overly challenging to say that has been on the table for a long time. And therefore, you know, we've got to draw a line one way or the other under some of these programs now. I also think, going back to the previous report that we've just had, we as a council have been, Kieran Carrigan has been a blessing and a curse. 30 odd years of understanding where every skeleton is buried in every budget everywhere in the council has meant that when the going has got tough, he's been able to find savings and he's been able to find ways through it. But the reality is, and those of us who are being honest about it, you've got two people who've led the council, and you've got Councillor Harrison who's been on the council. Kieran has found money in services for a long time because of his level of experience and how many budgets he was a part of setting. The reality is that line in the previous report about there is insufficient understanding of baseline costs and values from some of our management has to change. And it has to change in the next 6 months, because it's all well and good comparing ourselves to other councils about how fantastic some of our commercial program is, and we're PWLB and we're leasing and we're lending and we're doing all of this good stuff, but we don't really understand whether an increase in fees and charges at our community halls is actually delivering value or if we're still running at a loss. And I think we need to that is such a fundamental piece of work that, I would be saying to officers right now, do not go to service committees in November and December and ask a member to make a decision on those budgets until we're able to demonstrate that between the 2nd of July, when this committee has seen a report that says there is insufficient understanding of the baseline values, and a significant period of work over the next 4 or 5 months to square that off. So I really think that is an important piece of work that has to happen when it comes to setting the budgets. And it will be that baseline that benefits us going forward, because equally we need to understand whether or not some of the bigger things, I'll come back to you, Councillor Baker, but we need to understand some of the bigger things that we are talking about with it later on, lending, whether it's leasing, whether it's PWB, can that provide headroom for us to do other things, because we've got our house in order further down the chain on some of those other issues. So for me, that is such a priority, and we need to take that forward. I asked when I became chair of this committee back in May for Scott to take this forward, and I want that to happen. And I know other members were in support of that, because the chief exec has to lead this. And I would be saying, if I was looking at the report, the beauty of modern technology has just gone off my screen, but the report here where we had the different branches of the organisation that are doing different things, I would be saying very clearly that when it came to the masterclass series and the scenario-based commercial awareness, if the CEO and the SLT are not involved in those things, we're doing something wrong. Because we've got to hone, as I'm hearing one thing earlier on, we've got to have the pitches to be able to negotiate, we've got to be able to sell, we've got to be able to really understand who we're promoting that to. It's no good people really low down in our organisation getting that masterclass. The people up there do. And I would dare say, by the way, that there's probably members who benefit from that, because I appreciate in my position, and should the worst happen and Councillor Baggett ever comes back, then he might be in the position where we have to go to our neighbouring authorities or whatever it might be, and we may have to make the pitch to get the political leaders on side. So we might benefit from that masterclass series as well, and understanding a bit more about that. So I don't think we should be excluding people in that section when there is a lack. What we're seeing earlier on is there's a lack of skill at that level, and we need to be able to plug that gap. So people need to be not too proud to be in the same room as people elsewhere in the organisation. We all need to be in that room, and we need to be learning from people who have the skills that we don't. At the last meeting, and the one positive, not the one, that's slightly unfair. A positive I would say from May 12th to today is that when we challenged Owen, and we gave Owen a bit of a hard time at the last meeting, that when we challenged Owen, we asked about capacity. And Owen was very honest to say, it's a bit of me and a bit of Richard. And actually what I'm hearing from the chief executive tonight is we are plugging that with the people to work that has happened, and with this new group that has been set up to go forward. I don't want that group to be marking its own homework, and therefore it, to me, requires that group to be a standing agenda item on this committee, and the potential to go forward to understand a bit more about how members can be involved in that. We've spoken, haven't we, before about SEMPRA and about a possible board that looks at different areas of the borough that might be available for us to acquire. And the question that I've had, and this is no disrespect, I'm not digging anybody out, but the question I've had is how many officers sitting around that table even live in the borough? How many are able to actually see the potential opportunities on a daily basis? So equally with this, I think it might be the case that members need to get involved in it. And more generally on governance, I think we need to come back to this committee with a much clearer view of whether it is going to be a policy development group that needs to be looking at this. Whether that's the right thing, I don't know. But we've got the SEMPRA board. We've now got this commercial board. Somewhere, somehow this committee was supposed to be set up all those years ago to do this stuff and to get its hands dirty on this stuff. And then it became a reactionary committee. And I want it to go back to being what it was originally supposed to be, which is a more proactive committee. Yes, we might have to react to acquisitions, I accept that, but we need to be able to get our hands dirty. So making sure we see sight of what's going to that officer group and what decisions are being made and why decisions are being made, I think is really, really important. And the final part for me on this is looking at the programme, and I do want members involved in that programme, because I don't want things to be, for want of a better phrase, kicked into the long grass on some things. Many members know Acela is motoring. There are options coming forward all of the time with Acela. One of the things I scratch my head about constantly is why this council is in one source with East London authorities when we're supposed to be part of the Association of South Essex Local Authorities, where there is the potential to pool some of those shared services to go forward. And as I understand it, that's one of the things that government look at when rewarding with big money for things like infrastructure is, are you sharing services? Are you pooling resources locally to be able to demonstrate that there's a willingness to work across borders? To me, that's something that, and I know there's been resistance at Acela to some of that because it's not perhaps the sexiest of topics to kickstart the whole thing off. But there, to me, looks like there's so many different opportunities where we could engage there, and I think that would be a good thing to do. And as I said earlier on, I do want the green economy stuff to come here, because our town centre regeneration plan does afford the council an opportunity with the land that we own in our town centre to be a major player in district heating networks and in promoting some of the green economy that we could start getting across the whole of the borough, selling energy at a cheaper rate to businesses and residents in the town centre. So let's get that on the agenda coming forward, and look to reorganise some of the programme to reflect where the administration's priorities are, what the council is taking decisions on a weekly basis, and where the commercial opportunities lie. Scott, you wanted to come back.
Yes, you would expect me to come back just to say, to get clarity, that the training masterclass is including ET, SLT. I think, so let's be clear, it isn't just for those low in the organisation. And how can I lead it from the top if I'm not willing to go for the training? So let's be clear, I am going to be leading, and SLT and ET be part of the training. So I agree with you 100% on that. And I also agree that with your proposal around the delivery group, because it is me leading that, bringing back regular reports. The purpose, as I understand it, the purpose of this subcommittee is to look at and as Councillor Baggott said earlier, as well as yourself, is to look at things before we take them further forward in detailed business cases, rather than spending lots of money and then it going nowhere, or as your in members' opinions, kick it along grass. So I don't disagree, and we'll bring those reports, and that's the purpose of Irene, which I'm dare say he'll pick up in a minute, about developing this programme. And what we want to do, as I said, is following this evening, work with Mike Butler as part of People 2 to come back with a proposal for the next committee, and it won't be a detailed, obviously, in that space of time, but actually some how we want to take the program forward with members' agreement. And I welcome, and I have to say, I agree. We've had cross-party support for some time on commercial, so I welcome that continuing. And I do believe that this subcommittee is there to get more involved and scrutinise at the earliest stage, and commission officers to look at ideas. So I think that's what we want this group to be.
Okay, I'm going to bring Councillor Baggott back in. I just want to say it's good to hear that there is now the commitment from the senior officers to be at those. We just need to amend that schedule and that report to reflect that includes ET, SLT and yourself, Scott. Councillor Baggott.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's nice to know when you mentioned me coming back would be the worst thing. I can promise you it wouldn't be, but I realise you're probably losing sleep about it every night. It's more likely to be a cleaning wind of change and resident engagement rather than what we've got right now. However, that's slightly moving off topic, but you raised it. I would like. My understanding is that this particular item, there's some sort of ideas or proposals going forward that are being required. A couple of years ago, when we kicked off commerciality, we had a presentation from someone, and they raised a very interesting point. And that point was that because the way local government reports its finances and its outturns and its inturns, it actually doesn't lend itself that easily to look at things from a commercial point of view. And this touches upon Councillor Callaghan's point about services knowing what the nitty-gritty is as far as incomings, outcomings, and everything else. And they suggested at the time that it wouldn't be that hard to produce a profit and loss account for services and for the council alongside its normal reporting. And I asked officers at the time whether that was correct, whether it would be onerous, and I was told at that time that it wouldn't be. And I'd actually like to propose that is something that is now done, because I think that puts it into a commercial language. It certainly gets people to think differently in the way that things are put together. And I think it would alleviate the issue, which does seem to have gone on and on, of certain departments not necessarily knowing what their bottom line is.
Okay, Owen indicated on that.
I think I just want to step in on the conversation about understanding costs and financial control. And I think it's not we don't understand and we haven't got very strong financial control. We have, as local authority, we'll manage our budgets at service or sub-service level. We don't always go down to the cost of each individual widget, because one, it's obviously a lot more of an overhead and we don't need to in some of the activities of financial control we undertake. Where we do need to, we've got established financial models that some members will be aware of, where we do look at it in a commercial way. We look at true costs, we look at overhead recovery, we look at profit margins, look at spare capacity. So we do it, but we do it in a targeted way. And obviously what we need to do is look at where that is targeted and expand that, which obviously we will be doing over the next few months. But it's not as if we haven't got that strong financial control, but we do that commercial financing and report it in a targeted way. At the moment, we don't do it across the board because we haven't got that commercial need to do it across all services. I think it's just important to make that point.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that, and then I look back at the presentation that we've just had where it said insufficient understanding. To me, therein lies the issue, isn't it? That what we perhaps are seeing as strategically important, if we was to look at it in a different way, perhaps there are other areas of the council that could yield savings going forward. You want to come back, Owen?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chairman. I was just reminding you I have made a proposal. Hopefully there'll be a seconder.
Yeah, let's just deal with that with Owen. Go on, Owen.
Yeah, so where we have an activity that we need that financial scrutiny under, we manage it in a ring-fenced way and we report it in isolation and we look at what that surplus deficit is. We don't call it a profit and loss account, but it's managed in that respect. And it might be that we can bring that back and actually show members how we do that. That might be beneficial and give members some comfort.
Okay. Councillor Harrison, and then I'll come back to the amendment on the table.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I come in? I tend somewhat to agree with Councillor Baggott on a profit and loss account, but particularly on my committee, it's very difficult in some areas to understand the true cost as against what the benefits are of quite a few areas. And as Mike did in his report, talking about lettings and fees and charges, it would be useful to see something like that. I understand the difficulties when you're spreading across individual committees' budgets, overheads for corporate, etc., etc. But I think it would give some level of understanding, not only for members, but for members of the public as well, of the true cost of services. And that is what you're looking at. And if you do that properly, you will find out which ones are commercially beneficial and which ones aren't.
Okay, so Councillor Baggott, you have proposed, just run it past me again. When do you want the timing of this? Just so I'm clear.
Yeah, not necessarily the timing, Chairman. What it was it was saying that it wouldn't be onerous to do for the council, as well as producing its normal things which has to do statutorily, but also to convert that to a profit and loss account. And that profit and loss account would filter through to the individual services and everything else anyway, by nature of it being a profit and loss report. And that would actually highlight the issues that you were saying that we should be addressing, which I agree with, and that Councillor Harrison raised. So this was done, as I say, at a presentation. This had been done by other councils. Immediately I asked the question whether it was onerous to do, and I was told no, but it never happened. And I just think that it's if we want to be serious about being commercial, people understand profit and loss accounts. People understand whether you made a profit, whether you made a loss. They don't understand 1.5, people working in one department, transferring money to another department for the time they've spent and sub-passing budgets around all over the place. They don't understand it. So no wonder they can't get a grip of whether or not their service is profitable or not. And by having that as an extra report, I think would benefit members, I think it would benefit officers, and I think it would benefit the organisation as a whole.
Okay, so looking to bring that back in the autumn as part of the budget setting process is effectively what you're asking to do. I'm not seeing any dissent from members to that proposal. Owen?
I think a lot of what members are asking for is that next level down, the detail of the way we hold our costs at a more of a detailed level. So in some circumstances, that is very easy. In others, it's not. And that depends on how that fits into the way we have to produce our accounts and we have to actually publish them. So I think, again, obviously we'll need to go and look at that and look at where we can bring items forward and where we can't, because in some areas it's very easy and we do it anyway. Others are more cost cutting, it is more difficult, and it's not how we hold our information. So we need to look at how we do it. But I think in a lot of cases it is quite straightforward, and as it won't be, so I think we need to have a look at that before we can bring it back easily and quickly.
Councillor Baggott.
Yeah, sorry, I hear what you're saying, Owen, but then I would throw back the question that when I asked officers, of which you were one, could this be something that could be done without anything being onerous or resource heavy to the council? And I was told, yes, it can. To be hearing now, well, it's not that simple, sounds a bit yes ministry.
It depends. Now, in areas we can do, if it's across the whole of the council, we'd need to look at how we're structured. So in certain areas we can do, and we do it, but I without hand on heart, without knowing the structure of the council, I can't tell you we can do in every area. But I think it's something we can come back and report to members and give them some comfort. But I think we need to explore it a little bit more.
Well, I think you're answering Councillor Baggott's question there in some respect, in that we need to definitely have the 151 knowing what's going on in the structure of all of our services.
I wouldn't know the detail though, Chair. That's budget managers, but obviously we can pick it up.
Yeah, well, let's do that. And I think there's unanimous agreement from members here, though I can't see Councillor Harrison anymore. There appeared to be unanimous consent for us to do that and to bring that forward in the autumn as part of the budget setting that we're doing. So I'm not sure we need a vote on it, Annie, do we? But we're all in agreement. We would like to see that, and it will be minuted and we can vote on the minutes. Okay, if there are no further questions on this report, we are only asked to note it. So again, it doesn't require a vote of members. Thank you to the Chief Exec and to Owen for that report. And I hope that you take it in the spirit that it's meant. We are looking to improve as a council, and that's what the purpose of this committee is to do. And I hope that in the end we'll look back at, and we'll say that we got it right. So let's see it in that sense. Next up is the Digital Commercial Opportunities Report, and I'm going to hand over to Joe to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not intending on giving a formal PowerPoint presentation, which I'm sure members will be relieved about. We've obviously had quite a few already tonight, but just to bring out some of the key findings of the report. Clearly, we've already touched on some of these, so they will be familiar, and I won't labour the points that we've already talked about. But I think the first thing is the most important thing to recognise is that digital is one of the key ways in which we can increase and enhance service efficiency. When we talk about digital, it is an amorphous word. It is quite broad. It can mean lots of different things. But in this sense, we're talking about how we can use the technology of today and the future to ensure that the services that we deliver are as efficient as possible. And that's tied up into areas such as how we review our processes, how we review the way our services are designed and set up. And that by itself is an example of commercialization. It ties back into what Mike said in his presentation, but by thinking and acting in that way in terms of looking at all of the possible options of deploying digital to ensure our services are as efficient as possible, that in itself is commercial. Another sort of thing to raise at the beginning of this is that to be commercial, and it goes again back to what Mike was saying about the types of things you would do if you're a private organization, we need a secure and steady infrastructure and platform for our technology services. So the investment that members will be aware of that we're making through the ICT strategy, again, is actually part of an overall commercial move, because we need to ensure that we're set up to operate in a way that's commensurate with the mid-21st century. Because of the emphasis that digital has on innovation, and because the market is naturally emerging, I mean, when we talk about digital, we're talking about a wide gamut of things, as I've already said, but that of course includes the things that are at the forefront of innovation and technology. That can lend itself naturally to commercial opportunities. But one of the things we do also need to acknowledge is that nobody's really got this figured out. It's not something where we can point to a single council and go, they've cracked it. It is an evolving marketplace. So what we need to focus on is ensuring that we've got the principles that we need to ensure that we are well positioned to take advantage of the opportunities as they arise, but also to ensure that we don't fail to spot the opportunities in the first place. As you will see from the report, the commercial review identified 5 key different types of digital commercial enterprises. One of the sort of more obvious ones is around sort of developing digital solutions that deliver efficiency and deliver improved outcomes. And again, by itself, that's a commercial way of operating, but there's potential opportunity to then look at how we expand those services into other areas. One of the things that we, along with other councils, could look to do and are looking at is around how we use our intelligence better. So do we have some kind of business intelligence data hub? Now, this has significant benefits for us as an organization. I think we all understand that we're very data rich. The services that we have, by the nature of them, generate lots of insight, but how we use them is something that we're definitely still working on. How we use that insight is something we're definitely still working on. But again, once we get that right for ourselves, there may be opportunities with others. Developing our community and service user engagement. So that takes kind of 2 forms really. So one is how we engage with our communities in different ways using digital opportunities, and that's especially important in a post-COVID world. But also that comes back into what we may or may not decide to do with the information that we have around the residents that we interact with. And obviously there are significant caveats to that, and I think that kind of touches on some of the points that Councillor Rimmer was raising earlier. Another sort of key enterprise area is around having some kind of digital incubator, and obviously we've had the announcement this week, so we're already moving into that space. But how we, as a leader of place, can use our own digital approach to ensure that entrepreneurs locally are supported and that employment locally is supported to move at pace with this agenda. And I think, you know, we need to recognise that we have got some significant advantages in Basildon, both by the plethora of high-skilled jobs that are available in some of our key cross-sector employers, but also with things like the new digital campus for the college. It kind of gives us a head start in those sorts of areas, because one of the key lessons and messages around digital businesses and that sector of industry is that they always operate in clusters. You need a critical mass of businesses around a cluster of activity. And then finally, there's commercialization of digital products. So one of the things that we've been working hard on recently, and hopefully members will be aware of the recent launch, which I can say has been really successful, of our Streets app, which focuses on waste services. That's just one of the examples of the types of apps that we're currently working to develop and deliver in-house. And there are commercial opportunities both around how that helps us improve service delivery, but also, again, potential opportunities for how we can utilize and market those products for external customers and partners. So just to go over some of the key things that came out of the review, like I say, some of this has already been touched on, so I'm not going to labor any of the points, but it was acknowledged that, you know, we do have a number of products developed or in production, and that there's potential for those things to potentially be packaged and sold at some point. We know that the primary driver of our program of work is twofold, really: to ensure that we give our customers the best service we can, while at the same time building the additional capacity we need to in the council to realise the savings that we need to make. Digital is a very key enabler of that, and the work that's been going on in the waste strategy, for example, is a really tangible example of how digital is enabling significant service transformation, which in turn will lead to significant savings being realised. Digital in its broadest sense is recognised as the next key transformation theme for local government. I mean, I would say that actually it's already happening. Local government has been working on digital for, you know, the last 5 to 10 years, depending on which specific part of it. It's an enabler, I think, across the sector, and a priority for pretty much every council that I've come into contact with. There are greater funding opportunities available at the moment. It's a perverse consequence of the pandemic that actually both central government are looking to stimulate innovation. So there are some, I wouldn't want to overemphasize it though, but there are some opportunities there. But perhaps more interestingly, there are some really significant opportunities from third-party suppliers and potential partners who are looking to stimulate take-up of their business offer in a time that's quite challenging for them. So there's an opportunity for us, and we've already looked at and taken advantage of one of those opportunities with a pre-existing partner around how we can start developing a chatbot, so an automated customer service agent. Doesn't necessarily have to be an externally facing customer service agent, but looking at how we can start getting into the space of automation, which will, I think, be one of the key areas of growth, not only for us as a council, but for the entire sector. And automation generally allows us, going back to where I started, allows us to be as efficient as possible with the processes that tend to predominate in local government. We know we're already doing a lot of experimental work, and we know that that's going to continue. And by doing that, that will help us to continue to develop our in-house expertise. We obviously operate within a very competitive market in these areas, being our proximity to London, but even without that, it would be competitive. So one of our key drivers, of course, is to ensure that we are making the best resources that we've got in-house and developing people where possible. And that sense of experimentation and that sense of allowing people to try new things out would be a big part of that, but it'll also be a big part of how we raise our profile and establish our brand in this area. I think Mike mentioned this in his presentation, but the current digital market supply is sporadic and disaggregated. That provides opportunities though, because it does mean that new entrants are welcome. There are, different case studies of commercialized different digital products and services being offered by local authorities. But as we've said, at the moment, none of these have cracked it. None of these have come through and have proven a sort of model that everyone should be looking to emulate. We've already done quite a lot of work in partnership to varying levels of progression, depending on how those conversations and how that work has gone. So we've done work with Colchester, with Chelmsford, with others, and with some of our partners in the local geographic area, and we're continuing to explore the opportunities that provides. And the other thing, and I appreciate this sounds like a bit of a technical detail, but it is an important detail. We were a signatory of the government's local digital declaration. So that was something that many, many local authorities across the country signed up for. And we need to bear that in mind, because that does come with a set of principles that we're all supposed to be working towards. And some of the principles are really focused on collaboration, transparency, and working in the open. So in some ways, they are things we might have to reflect upon if we start to take an ever increasing commercial perspective on this work. What's really important, I think, and what we're really looking to get approval from today and this conversation, is that there are 3 principles that we are looking to adopt. And this kind of ties back to the previous conversation, in the sense that these principles will then run through everything we do, and we'll ensure that our governance structure reflect these principles to make sure that people are adhering to them when they're working in the digital space. So the first principle is to ensure that there's a commercial awareness applied in the design of new digital products and initiatives. So it may sound obvious, but actually sometimes it's not. When you're working on a new product in the digital space, how can you build in at the front end the ability and the capacity to potentially expand that in a commercial way once you've got a finished product? So not painting ourselves into corners at the beginning, and making sure that we're very conscious of the need to be digital in everything we do. Another principle is obviously around horizon scanning to identify commercial opportunities and market trends. Now, obviously, this will be happening as part of the overall commercial program anyway, but for the reasons that I've spoken about, there's a specific emphasis on this for our digital work, because that is where some of those opportunities are going to arise. And we should bear in mind that this is a two-way process. Some of these opportunities will arise for us to push stuff out onto the market. And some of it will arise in terms of what the market can offer us and what the opportunities therefore are. And then the final one, and I've already touched on this, is around having governance arrangements that include explicit requirements. So obviously, all of our big programs of activity are managed by a program management structure anyway, but we're looking to build in specific gateways that ensure that digital considerations are being borne in mind, and that we're having commercial considerations are being borne in mind, and that when we're working in a digital way, we're doing it in a way that allows us to maximize fully any potential commercial opportunities. So that was quite a quick run through. I appreciate that, but I didn't want to spend too long considering some of that we've already touched on. So I'll leave that there.
Thank you. Open this up to members. Any member wishing to come in at this point? Councillor Rimmer.
Thank you, Joe. It was interesting and also interestingly picked up on the caveats. It was just to know what those caveats would be in terms of protecting our residents and their data when we're actually looking at commercial opportunities on the digital side. So I'm keen to know what those would be. And then I've got another question, but you can answer that one first, of course.
I mean, I think if we were having this conversation 2 years ago, we probably would have gotten into the realm of ethics and morals and guiding principles and all this sort of stuff. Now we don't really need to have that conversation, because it's answered with 4 letters, GDPR. And if we start looking at how we can use our data for outside sources, the GDPR regulations are so strong around these sorts of areas that we would need to, that would be our guidance, and we would look at that and understand how we can use data effectively. What I would say is that if we started to look at the potential of using data in a commercial way, we would always do it in a way that's at an aggregate level. So we wouldn't get anywhere near anything that allows people to be specifically and individually identified. It would always be data that's anonymous and would be talking about trends and things like that. At the moment, we don't have any clear intention to do that, but obviously, given the nature of the work and the nature of the conversation we've just had, we don't want to be in a position either where we're taking stuff clearly off the table. I think we'd have to have very clear consideration about anything in that area and be sure that we understood what we were doing, and obviously involve members in that process as well.
Actually, I wouldn't mind coming back on that, because obviously, as a public sector organisation, we do have that sort of cover-all public service in GDPR, and also I have concerns, because when central government was looking at a digital ID, obviously, and with the Verify project, they were actually concerned about. They went beyond GDPR in terms of the level of privacy. and in terms of protecting people. So I think ethics would still need to be played out on this, because there is also the question. I don't think in some elements GDPR goes far enough for us in protecting our residents. And on the second element, we don't know whether we'll be using GDPR in the future if divergence post Brexit leads that we actually have different rules than GDPR. So it's on that point. But instead of labouring this too much, I did have another question as well, and that was actually in terms of digital innovation and whether we were actually looking at things like tech sprints or hackathons and that sort of model to look at ways that we could be developing apps and inviting and having partnerships with startup companies to where we set the problem, and in that sort of hub environment, they come up with potential solutions and we award a winner or something with a contract.
Yeah, can I come back on that? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in terms of the privacy question, I think what we've sort of uncovered there is the evolving nature of this work and the fact that actually that could be a whole meeting by itself. And obviously, if Paul wants to add anything in, he can to that. In terms of the hackathons and stuff, that is actually something we've been looking at. And I think we probably would have had our first one by now. And I'm sorry to mention the C word, we would have had our first one by now if it hadn't been for COVID. And obviously, by its very nature, that sort of thing can be facilitated online. So it's not because we couldn't get together in person, it's because we've had to look at other priorities because of our digital response to the pandemic. But that's something we absolutely want to do. We want to recognise the capability that we've got in-house, the capability that we've got in the borough, because it's not just businesses, we might have some very able and interested residents as well, and obviously what we can do to support and be supported by the local SME sector. The only other thing I would say is in terms of the development of the apps, we've got a very productive and very strong relationship with the University of Essex. So the Our Streets app and another app that's hopefully soon going to come online around how we engage with our residents have both been developed in conjunction with students at the University of Essex who've proven to be a really, really good resource and partners for us. So how we can look to expand our reach into the academic sector is also something we're considering.
Okay, Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened with interest to Joe's report and the questions that Craig's asked. Can I suggest that I think what we really need now is a route map of where we're going, because there's some interesting ideas come out. There's ideas on the report with the other councils, etc. And I would like to see a clear path of where we actually intend to be. Perhaps next committee meeting or whatever, just as a suggestion.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, look, councillors have put £10 million into the budget back in February over the next few years for digital transformation, and we need to start seeing more than just strategies, really. And I mean, I note the report and I take the point about principles, but all we're doing is adding principles into strategies that we've already passed and that we've spent a lot of time at PNR and other committees talking about over the years. So I think we do need to see that route map as Councillor Harrison has suggested. I am not as convinced. I don't know whether it's right or wrong. I'm not as convinced we are as data rich and we have the insights that. I mean, certainly from my perspective, having spent the last 3 years in particular banging the drum for the fact that we're the 5th most economically unequal borough in the UK and we have huge levels of deprivation in different parts of our borough, being in a position to get hold of some of that data insight and analysis to then inform policy would have been, incredibly beneficial. And to me, we don't seem to have that. What I would be interested in is understanding how we, along with partners across South Essex and the Acela region, could be building digital ecosystems to share information, and obviously the county involved in that, sharing information at that level, so that we link all of what is in this and more principles going into more strategies. We've got to link all of that to the corporate plan. and the corporate plan is pretty clear about some of these things that we want to do, and narrowing that gap and creating opportunities and all this sort of stuff is so important to it. I'd also take the point, I think, which is what we need to understand, is who is the client? You know, we've in various different agenda items tonight, we've had reports where, in essence, we're fishing in the same pool, whether it's in digital, whether it's in revs and bends, whether, you know, whatever it is in, we're seeking to tap up the same people to try and get, you know, more money out of them or whatever. And I'm just not clear in my own mind on what we're selling and who we're selling it to on digital. So I think we need to do that. And I would agree, and I would add a recommendation into this, that we come back in probably 2 weeks' time is not enough for the 30th of July committee, but certainly September, come back and we have a very clear route map that shows the level of investment that members have made to the budget over the next few years and what we're actually going to get for that money. Mr. Birkinshaw wants to come in.
I think, Chairman, just to come back, and we welcome the opportunity to present that. That does exist, that timeline. I think obviously there's an issue around raising that awareness, and I think it's important as well to emphasise, we'll have the opportunity to do that hopefully with the committee, around the very strong direction of travel, and the work predates even the adoption of the IT strategy. So in terms of the data we hold, I think we hold a lot of data. I think what you've referenced is around our ability to analyse that, but I think certainly our ability to understand and effective governance of that data, and that work's been ongoing for a number of months. It's supplemented around things like the GIS, where we not certainly as strong as we should be, but it's going to be integral to this, and we have got that route map around the ICT strategy and the investments, and very much around building the infrastructure, building on the work that's been undertaken over the last 18 months to transfer networks and infrastructure to NTT, which provides the platform, and that timeline exists for bringing that forward. I think the process reviews and what Joe then talks about how we bring them in is what's referenced in here, and we can also bring the timeline and proposals around that. So I think welcome the opportunity, I'm sure, to bring that back to members to have that discussion in more detail, because I think there is a very strong direction of travel. I think there is a point which you mentioned, which is a valid around, you know, and we're very conscious of this, around sometimes we're talking about the same services for different interventions, and we need to ensure that we effectively manage that, and that's something we'll be looking forward to. But I think the trajectory, the direction of travel is more positive than perhaps members have alluded to, and would welcome the opportunity, I think, to have that further discussion around the timeline and direction of travel that is developing significantly at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's doom and gloom. I just think it's a matter of members have put up, a bit like we were talking about in the previous few agenda items, we put up significant investment. We've got to get the clarity around what we're doing. And, you know, from my perspective on this committee, there's, you know, not necessarily about forming policy. You know, P&R forms policy, the parent committee to this. This is about actually seeing what we are going to do commercially to take on those or to put the council in a position to make some money out of it. So I would add in, and again, unless I get any abstentions or indications of dissent, I think it's a unanimous agreement to get a report back in September to look at the what I just said there. It's been a long day. To look at the route map that Councillor Harrison asked for. Does anyone else have anything else on this digital report? Because we are asked to vote on it. So I will ask Councillor Harrison, subject to that minor amendment we've just said. How do you vote?
In favour.
Councillor Baggott?
In favour.
Councillor Rimmer?
In favour.
And I vote in favour. So that's carried unanimously. Thank you to members. I think we've added a few things as we've gone to agenda item 7, which is the work programme. Unless anybody has got anything significant to add. Councillor Harrison, you've indicated.
Yes, Chairman. When the Chief Executive gave his presentation earlier, interesting item on there, which I think we should be looking at, is contracts.
do we have a sorry, go on.
Oh, go on.
I was going to say, don't we have a housing contract subcommittee? Is that something that still exists? I can't even remember.
No, it doesn't exist anymore.
No. Okay. Owen, you indicated then.
Finger on the pulse there.
What did you say? I didn't hear that.
Unmute.
Finger
Sorry.
on the pulse there, Chairman.
Yeah.
On the work plan, Chair, at the next meeting's commercial procurement update, which will bring an update to members on contracting and things associated with that.
On here, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we're bringing the commercial procurement here then. So that can include elements of COVID, I assume, and the contracts that we're talking about post-pandemic.
Yeah, it'd been.
Go on.
Paul, you going? I don't know.
I was just going to say, Chairman, it'd be useful if Councillor Harrison could just expand on that so we can ensure we cover what he's referring to within there.
Councillor Harrison.
In Scott's presentation, he detailed the areas where commercial activities could come into it, and he listed one of those contracts, and I assume he meant contracts right across the council's activities, not just housing. I might be wrong, but I'm sure Scott will correct me if I am wrong.
Scott?
I'll always correct Councillor Allen if he's wrong, but he's not wrong. The whole point of this is that in your work programme, we are picking up all of those hexagons in the presentations over the next few months. And equally in the programme, we've said we would give you a delivery group update, so that will cover more of all this work. But that's why it's all in the detail there. So the procurement is covering those key contracts. Not every contract, it'll be going obviously through the key ones first and bringing that back.
Okay, thank you. Can I just point out, it says autumn, I'm looking at that as September for the next one after the 30th of July and then monthly thereafter. Just to give officers an indication of when those 5-6 reports will need to be ready. Does anyone else have anything to add to the work programme? If not, we need to vote on it. Councillor Harrison?
Favour.
Councillor Baggott?
In favour.
Councillor Rimmer?
In favour.
And I vote in favour as well. So that's carried unanimously. Thank you, members. Apologies for the time of day that we are heading to our visitors. But before we do that, we do need to move into part 2. So I am going to propose exclusion of the press and public, which would mean that we end our live streaming here. Councillor Harrison, how do you vote? Councillor Baggott?
Abstain.
Councillor Rimmer?
Abstain.
Okay, I vote in favour. So the motion is carried. Can I ask Annie to turn off the live stream, please?
Yes, I'll just do that now.